Chapter 12. Marge said she didn't care to go with them to Sanremo. She was in the middle of a streak on her book. Marge worked in fits and started, always cheerfully, though it seemed to Tom that she was bogged down, and she called it, about 75% of the time, a condition that she always announced with a merry little laugh. The book must stink, Tom thought. He had known writers. You didn't write a book with your little finger, lolling on the beach half the day, wondering what to eat for dinner. But he was glad she was having a streak at the time he and Dickie wanted to go to San Remo. "I'd appreciate it if you try to find that cologne, Dickie," she said. "You know, the Stradivari I couldn't find in Naples. San Remo's bound to have it. They have so many shops with French stuff." Tom could see them spending a whole day looking for it in San Remo, just as they had spent hours looking for it in Naples one Saturday. They took only one suitcase of Dickie's between them because they planned to be away only 3 nights and 4 days. Dickie was in a slightly more cheerful mood, but the awful finality was still there, the feeling that this was the last trip they would make together anywhere. To Tom, Dickie's polite cheerfulness on the train was like the cheerfulness of a host who had loathed his guest, as if afraid the guest realized it, and who tries to make it up at the last minute. Tom had never before in his life felt like an unwelcome, boring guest. On the train, Dickie told Tom about San Remo and the week he had spent there with Freddie Miles when he first arrived in Italy. San Remo was tiny, but it had a famous name as an international shopping center, Dickie said, and people came across the French border to buy things there. It occurred to Tom that Dickie was trying to sell him on the town and might try to persuade him to stay there alone instead of coming back to Mongebello. Tom began to feel an aversion to the place before they got there. They almost, as the train was sliding into the San Remo station, Dickie said, "By the way, Tom, I hate to say this to you, if you're going to mind terribly, but I really would prefer to go to Cortina d'Ampezzo alone with Marge. I think she'd prefer it, and after all, I owe something to her, a pleasant holiday at least. You don't seem to be too enthusiastic about skiing anyway." Tom went rigid and cold, but he tried not to move a muscle, blaming it on Marge. "All right," he said, "of course." Nervously, he looked at the map in his hand, looked desperately around San Remo for somewhere else to go, though Dickie was already swinging their suitcase down from the rack. "We're not far from Nice, are we?" Tom asked. "No." "And Cannes. I like to see Cannes as long as I'm this far. At least Cannes is France," he added on a reproachful note. "Well, I suppose we could. You brought your passport, didn't you?" Tom had brought his passport. They boarded a train for Cannes and arrived around 11 o'clock that night. Tom thought it beautiful, the sweep of curving harbor extended by little lights to long, thin crescent tips, the elegant yet tropical-looking main boulevard along the water with its rows of palm trees, its rows of expensive hotels. France. It was more sedate than Italy and more chic. He could feel that even in the dark. They went to a hotel on the first back street, the Grès d'Albion, which was chic enough but wouldn't cost them their shirts, Dickie said, though Tom would gladly have paid whatever it cost at the best hotel on the ocean front. They left their suitcase at the hotel and went to the bar of the Hotel Carton, which Dickie said was the most fashionable bar in Cannes. As he had predicted, there were not many people in the bar because there were not many people in Cannes at this time of year. Tom proposed a second round of drinks, but Dickie declined. They breakfasted at a cafe, and the next morning they strolled down to the beach. They had their swimming trunks on under their trousers. The day was cool, but not impossibly cool for swimming. They had been swimming in Mongebello on colder days. The beach was practically empty. A few isolated pairs of people, a group of men playing some kind of game up the embankment. The waves curved around and broke on the sand with a wintry violence. Now Tom saw that the group of men were doing acrobatics. They must be professionals, Tom said. They're all in the same yellow G-strings. Tom watched with interest as a human pyramid began building, feet braced on bulging thighs, hands gripping forearms. He could hear their allez and their on Dieu. Look, Tom said. They've got to the top. He stood to watch the smallest one, a boy of about 17, and he was boosted to the shoulders of the center man in the three top men. He stood posed, his arms open as if receiving applause. Bravo! Tom shouted. The boy smiled at Tom before he leapt down, lithe as a tiger. Tom looked at Dickie. Dickie was looking at a couple of men sitting near by the beach. 10,000 saw I at the glance, nodding their heads in sprightly dance. Dickie said sourly to Tom. It startled Tom that he felt the sharp thrust of shame, the same shame he had felt in Mongebello when Dickie had said, Mars, think you are. All right, Tom thought, the acrobats were fairies. Maybe Cannes was full of fairies. So what? Tom's fists were clenched tight in his trouser pockets. He remembered Aunt Dottie's taunt. Sissy. He's a sissy from the ground up, just like his father. Dickie stood with his arms folded, looked out at the ocean. Tom deliberately kept himself from even glancing at the acrobats again, though they were certainly more amusing to watch than the ocean. Are you going in? Tom asked, boldly unbuttoning his shirt, though the water suddenly looked cold as hell. I don't think so, Dickie said. Why don't you stay here and watch the acrobats? I'm going back. He turned and started back before Tom could answer. Tom buttoned his clothes hastily, watching Dickie as he walked diagonally away from the acrobats, though the next stairs up to the sidewalk were twice as far as the stairs nearer the acrobats. Damn him anyway, Tom thought. Did he have to act so damn aloof and superior all the time? You'd think he'd never seen a pansy. Obviously, what was the matter with Dickie, all right? Why didn't he break down just for once? What did he have that was so important to lose? A half-dozen taunts sprang to his mind as he ran after Dickie. Then Dickie glanced around at him coldly with distaste, and the first taunt died in his mouth. They left for San Remo that afternoon, just before 3 o'clock, so there would not be another day to pay on the hotel bill. Dickie had proposed leaving by 3, though it was Tom who paid the 3,430 franc bill, $10.08 American for one night. Tom also bought their railroad tickets to San Remo, though Dickie was loaded with francs. Dickie had brought his monthly remittance check from Italy and cashed it in francs, figuring that he would come out better converting the francs back into a lire later because of the sudden recent strengthening of a franc. Dickie said absolutely nothing on the train. Under a pretense of being sleepy, he folded his arms and closed his eyes. Tom sat opposite him, staring at his bony, arrogant, handsome face, at his hands with the green ring and the gold signet ring. It crossed Tom's mind to steal the green ring when he left. It would be so easy. Dickie took it off when he swam. Sometimes he took it off even when he showered at the house. He would do it very late on the last day, Tom thought. Tom stared at Dickie's closed eyelids. A crazy emotion of hate, of affection, of impatience, and frustration was swelling in him, hampering his breathing. He wanted to kill Dickie. It was not the first time he had thought of it. Before, once or twice or 3 times, it had been an impulse caused by anger or disappointment, an impulse that vanished immediately and left him with a feeling of shame. Now he thought about it for an entire minute. 2 minutes, because he was leaving Dickie anyway, and what was there to be ashamed of any more? He had failed with Dickie in every way. He hated Dickie because however he looked at what had happened, his failing had not been his own fault, not due to anything he had done, but due to Dickie's inhuman stubbornness and his blatant rudeness. He had offered Dickie friendship, companionship, and respect, everything he had to offer, and Dickie had replied with ingratitude and now hostility. Dickie was just shoving him into the cold. If he killed him on this trip, Tom thought, he could simply say that some accident had happened. He could. He had just thought of something brilliant. He could become Dickie Greenleaf himself. He could do everything that Dickie did. He could go back to Montebello first and collect Dickie's things, tell Marge any damn story, set up an apartment in Rome or Paris, receive Dickie's checks every month and forge Dickie's signature on it. He could step right into Dickie's shoes. He could have Mr. Greenleaf Sr. eating out of his hand. The danger of it, even the inevitable temporariness of it which he vaguely realized, only made him more enthusiastic. He began to think of how. The water. But Dickie was such a good swimmer. The cliffs. It would be easy to push Dickie off some cliff when they took a walk, but he imagined Dickie grabbing a hand and pulling himself up some way, and he tensed at the seat until his thighs ached and his nails cut red scallops into his thumbs. He would have to get the other ring off too. He would have to tint his hair a little lighter, but he wouldn't live in a place, of course, where anybody would know Dickie lived. He had only to look enough like Dickie to be able to use his passport. Well, he did, if he... Dickie opened his eyes, looking right at him, and Tom relaxed, slumped into the corner with his head back and his eyes shut as quickly as if he had passed out. "Tom, are you okay?" Dickie asked, shaking Tom's knee. "Okay," Tom said, smiling a little. He saw Dickie sit back with an air of irritation, and Tom knew why, because Dickie had hated giving him even that much attention. Tom smiled to himself, amused at his own quick reflex in pretending to collapse, because that had been the only way to keep Dickie from seeing what must have been a very strange expression on his face. San Remo. Flowers. A main drag along the beach again, shops and stores and French and English and Italian tourists. Another hotel with flowers in the balconies. Where? In one of these little streets tonight? The town would be dark and silent by 1 in the morning. If he could keep Dickie up that long. In the water? It was slightly cloudy, though, not cold. Tom racked his brain. It would be easy in the hotel room, too, but how would he get rid of the body? The body had to disappear, absolutely. They left only the water, and the water was Dickie's element. There were boats, rowboats, and little motorboats that people could rent down at the beach. In each motorboat, Tom noticed, was a round weight of cement attached to a line for anchoring the boat. "What do you say we take a boat, Dickie?" Tom asked, trying not to sound eager, though he did. And Dickie looked at him because he had not been eager about anything since they had arrived here. They were little blue and white and green and white motorboats, about 10 of them, lined up in a wooden pier, and the Italian was anxious for customers because it was a chilly and rather gloomy morning. Dickie looked out at the Mediterranean, which was slightly hazy, though not with a presage of rain. This was the kind of grayness that would not disappear all day, and there would be no sun. It was about 10:30, that lazy hour after breakfast when the whole long Italian morning lay before them. "Well, all right, for an hour around the port," Dickie said, almost immediately jumping into a boat, and Tom could see from his little smile that he had done it before, that he was looking forward to remembering sentimentally other mornings here, perhaps with Freddie or Marge. Marge's cologne bottle bulged the pocket of Dickie's corduroy jacket. They had bought it a few minutes ago at a store, very much like an American drugstore on the main drag. The Italian boatkeeper started the motor with a yanking string, asking Dickie if he knew how to work it, and Dickie said yes. And there was an oar, a single oar in the boat and Tom saw it too. Dickie took the tiller. They headed straight out from the town. "Cool!" Dickie yelled, smiling. His hair was blowing. Tom looked to the right and left, a vertical cliff on the side, very much like Montebello, and on the other a flatfish length of land fussing out in the mist that hovered over the water. Offhand, he couldn't say in which direction it was better to go. "Do you know the land around here?" Tom shouted over the roar of the motor. "Nope," Dickie said cheerfully. He was enjoying the ride. "Is that thing hard to steer?" "Oh, not a bit. You want to try it?" Tom hesitated. Dickie was still staring straight out to the open sea. "No, thanks." He looked to right and left. There was a sailboat off to the left. "Where are you going?" Tom shouted. "Does it matter?" Dickie smiled. No, it didn't. Dickie swerved suddenly to the right, so suddenly that they both had to duck and lean to keep the boat righted. A wall of white spray rose up on Tom's left, then gradually fell to show the empty horizon. They were streaking across the empty water again toward nothing. Dickie was trying the speed, smiling, his blue eyes smiling at the emptiness. "In a little boat it always feels so much faster than it is," Dickie yelled. Tom nodded, letting his understanding smile speak for him. Actually, he was terrified. God only knew how deep the water was here. If something happened to the boat suddenly, there wasn't a chance in the world that they could get back to shore, or at least that he could. But neither was there a chance that anybody could see anything that they did here. Dickie was swerving very slightly towards the right again, towards the long spit of fuzzy gray land, but he could have hit Dickie, sprung on him, or even kissed him, or thrown him overboard, and nobody could have seen him at this distance. Tom was sweating, hot under his clothes, cold on his forehead. He felt afraid, but it was not of the water. It was of Dickie. He knew that he was going to do it, that he would not stop himself now, maybe couldn't stop himself, and that he might not succeed. "You dare me to jump in?" Tom yelled, beginning to unbutton his jacket. Dickie only laughed at this proposal from him, opening his mouth wide, keeping his eyes fixed on the distance in front of the boat. Tom kept on undressing. He had his shoes and socks off. Under his trousers he wore his swimsuit. Like Dickie. "I'll go in if you will," Tom shouted. "Will you?" He wanted Dickie to slow down. "Will I? Sure." Dickie slowed the motorboat. He released the tiller and took off his jacket. The boat bobbed, losing its momentum. "Come on," Dickie said, nodding at Tom's trousers that were still on. Tom glanced at the land. San Remo was a blur of chalky white and pink. He picked up the oar as casually as if he were playing with it between his knees, and when Dickie was shoving his trousers down, Tom lifted the oar and came down with it on the top of Dickie's head. "Hey!" Dickie yelled, scowling, sliding half off of the wooden seat, his pale brow lifted in groggy surprise. Tom stood up and brought the oar down again, sharply, all his strength released like a snap of a rubber band. "For God's sakes!" Dickie mumbled, glowering fierce, though the blue eyes wobbled, losing consciousness. Tom swung a left-handed blow with the oar against the side of Dickie's head. The edge of the oar cut a dull gash that filled with a line of blood as Tom watched. Dickie was on the bottom of the boat, twisting. Dickie gave a groaning roar of protest that frightened Tom with its loudness and its strength. Tom hit him in the side of the neck. 3 times, chopping strokes with the edge of the oar, as if the oar were an axe and Dickie's neck a tree. The boat rocked, and water splashed over his foot that was braced on the gunwale. He sliced at Dickie's forehead, and a broad patch of blood came slowly where the oar had scraped. For an instant Tom was aware of tiring, and he raised and swung, and still Dickie's hand slid toward him on the bottom of the boat. Dickie's long legs straightened to thrust him forward. Tom got a bayonet grip on the oar and plunged its handle into Dickie's side. Then the prostrate body relaxed, limp and still. Tom straightened, getting his breath back painfully. He looked around him. There were no boats, nothing except far, far away, a little white spot creeping from right to left, a speeding motorboat headed for the shore. He stopped and yanked at Dickie's green ring. He pocketed it. The other ring was tighter, but it came off, over the bleeding, scuffled knuckle. He looked into the trouser pockets. French and Italian coins. He left them. He took a keychain with 3 keys. Then he picked up Dickie's jacket and took Marge's cologne package out of the pocket. Cigarettes and Dickie's silver lighter, a pencil stub, the alligator wallet, and several little cards in the inside breast pocket. Tom stuffed it all into his own corduroy jacket. Then he reached for the rope that was tumbled over the white cement weight. The end of the rope was tied to a metal ring at the prow. Tom tried to untie it. It was a hellish, water-soaked, immovable knot that must have been there for years. He banged at it with his fist. He had to have a knife. He looked at Dickie. Was he dead? Tom crouched in the narrowing prow of the boat, watching Dickie for a sign of life. He was afraid to touch him, afraid to touch his chest or his wrists to feel a pulse. Tom turned and yanked at the rope frenziedly until he realized that he was only making it tighter. His cigarette lighter! He fumbled for it in the pocket of his trouser on the bottom of the boat. He lighted it and then held a dry portion of the rope over its flame. The rope was about 1.5 inches thick. It was slow, very slow, and Tom used the minutes to look all around him again. Would the Italian with the boat be able to see him at this distance? The hard gray rope refused to catch fire, only glowing and smoking a little, slowly parting, strand by strand. Tom yanked it, and his lighter went out. He lit it again and kept on pulling at the rope. When it parted, he looped it 4 times around Dickie's bare ankles before he had time to feel afraid, and tied a huge, clumsy knot, overdoing it to make sure it would not come undone, because he was not very good at tying knots. He estimated the rope to be about 35 or 40 feet long. He began to feel cooler and smooth and methodical. The cement weight should be just enough to hold a body down, he thought. The body might drift a little, but it would not come up to the surface. Tom threw the weight over. It made a kerplung and sank through the transparent water with a wake of bubbles, disappeared and sank until the rope drew taut on Dickie's ankles, and by that time Tom had lifted the ankles over the side and was pulling now at the arm to lift the heaviest part, the shoulders, over the gunwale. Dickie's limp hand was warm and clumsy. The shoulders stayed on the bottom of the boat, and when he pulled, the arm seemed to stretch like rubber, and the body not to rise at all. Tom got down on the knee and tried to heave him out over the side. It made the boat rock. He had forgotten the water. It was the only thing that scared him. He would have to get him over the stern, he thought, because the stern was lower in the water. He pulled the limp body toward the stern, sliding the rope along the gunwale. He could tell from the buoyancy of the weight of the water that the weight had not touched bottom. Now he began with Dickie's head and shoulders, turning Dickie's body on its belly, and pushed him out little by little. Dickie's head was in the water, the gunwale cutting across his wrist, and now the legs were in the dead weight, resisting. Tom's strength with their amazing weight, and his shoulders had done as if they were magnetized to the boat bottom. Tom took a deep breath and heaved. Dickie went over, but Tom lost his balance and fell against the tiller. The idling motor roared suddenly. Tom made a lunge for the control lever, but the boat swerved at the same time in a crazy arc. For an instant he saw water underneath him, and his own hand outstretched towards it, because he had been trying to grab the gunwale, and the gunwale was no longer there. He was in the water. He gasped, contracting his body in an upward leap, grabbing at the boat. He missed. The boat had gone into a spin. Tom leaped again, then sank lower, so low the water closed over his head again with a deadly, fatal slowness, yet too fast for him to get a breath, and he inhaled a noseful of water just as his eyes sank below the surface. The boat was farther away. He had seen such spins before. They never stopped until somebody climbed in and stopped the motor, and now, in the deadly emptiness of the water, he suffered in advance the sensations of dying, sank, threshing below the surface again, and for the crazy motor faded as the water thugged in his ears, blotting out all sound except the frantic sounds that he made inside himself, breathing, Struggling, the desperate pounding of his blood. He was up again and fighting automatically towards the boat because it was the only thing that floated, though it was spinning and impossible to touch, and its sharp prow whipped past him twice, 3 times, 4, while he caught one breath of air. He shouted for help. He got nothing but a mouthful of water. His hand touched the boat beneath the water and was pushed aside by the animal-like thrust of the prow. He reached out wildly for the end of the boat, heedless of the propeller's blade. His fingers felt the rudder. He ducked, but not in time. The keel hit the top of his head, passing over him. Now the stern was close again, and he tried for it. Fingers slipping down off the rudder. His other hand caught the stern gunwale. He kept an arm straight, holding his body away from the propeller. With an unpremeditated energy, he hurled himself toward the stern corner and caught an arm over the side. Then he reached up and touched the lever. The motor began to slow. Tom clutched to the gunwale with both hands, and his mind went blank with disbelief, until he became aware of the flaming ache in his throat, the stab in his chest with every breath. He rested for what could have been 2 or 10 minutes, thinking of nothing at all but the gathering of strength enough to haul himself into the boat. And finally he made a slow jumps up and down in the water and threw his weight over and lay face down in the boat. His feet dangling over the gunwale, he rested, faintly conscious of the slipperiness of Dickie's blood under his fingers, a wetness mingled with the water that ran out of his own nose and mouth. He began to think before he could move about the boat that was all bloody and could not be returned, about the motor that he would have to get up and start in a moment, about the direction, about Dickie's rings. He felt for them in his jacket pocket. They were still there. And after all, what could have happened to them? He had a fit of coughing, and tears blurred his vision as he tried to look all around him to see if any boat was near or coming towards him. He rubbed his eyes. There was no boat except the gay little motorboat in the distance, still dashing around in the wide arcs, oblivious of him. Tom looked at the boat bottom. Could he wash it all out? But blood was hell to get out. He had always heard. He had been going to return the boat and say, if he were asked by a boatkeeper where his friend was, that he had set him ashore in some other point. Now that couldn't be. Tom moved the lever cautiously. The idling motor picked up, and he was afraid even of that. But the motor seemed more human and manageable than the sea, and therefore less frightening. He headed obliquely toward the shore, north of San Remo. Maybe he could find some place, some little deserted cove in the shore where he could beach the boat and get out. But if they found the boat, the problem seemed immense. He tried to reason himself back to coolness. His mind seemed blocked as how to get rid of the boat. Now he could see pine trees, a dry, empty-looking stretch of tan beach, and the green fuzz of a field of olive trees. Tom cruised slowly to right and left of the place, looking for people. Good, there were none. He headed in for the shallow, short beach, handling the throttle respectfully because he was not sure if it wouldn't flare up again. Then he felt the scrape and jolt of earth under the prow. He turned the lever to perma and moved another lever that cut the motor. He got out cautiously into about 10 inches of water, pulled the boat up as far as he could, then transferred the 2 jackets, his sandals, and Marge's cologne box from the boat to the beach. The little cove where he was, no more than 15 feet wide, gave him a feeling of safety and privacy. There was not a sign anywhere that a human foot had ever touched the place. Tom decided to try to scuttle the boat. He began to gather stones, all about the size of a human head, because that was all he had the strength to carry, and to drop them one by one in the boat. But finally he had to use smaller stones because there were no more big ones near enough by. He worked without halt, afraid that he would drop in a faint of exhaustion if he allowed himself to relax, even for an instant, and that he might lie there until he was found by somebody. Whether the stone was nearly level with the gunwale, he shoved the boat off and rocked it more and more until water sloped in at the sides. As the boat began to sink, he gave it a shove toward deeper water, shoved and walked with it until the water was up to his waist, and the boat sank below he reached. Then he plowed his way back to the shore and lay down for a while face down on the sand. He began to plan his return to the hotel and his story at his next move, leaving San Remo before nightfall, getting back to Mongebello, and the story there.